Nice. Yeah.
So I'm here to help your business under the DevSec FinOps Cloud Native institution of Jay Keshur Services.
I mean, it's now called Cash Ops. You know,
It's just Cash Ops. You know, for £2,000,
For
you can get all
£2,000.
of these services. Hello and welcome to Cloud Unplugged. This is season 2, episode 5. I'm Jon Shanks.
And I'm Jay Keshur.
So we put the world to rights in the last episode. Feel free to have a listen. Apparently, I got the most passionate I've ever been.
Yeah.
So last time we spoke about kind of just how to make decisions so that you don't have high cost or insecure cloud delivery, and whether you can stay lean. Today we're going to talk about like cloud native. What does cloud native mean? DevOps. What does DevOps mean to cloud native? Obviously they're separate things, but kind of overlay a little bit on quality and expectations around applications. And then portability and the other advantages and things like that, and whether it's important, whether you should do it, whether you shouldn't do it. So I guess cloud native, Jay.
Sure.
As always, I'll ask you questions and then violently disagree with everything.
I might ask you a few questions here because you were head of DevOps a few times.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you what DevOps
Bloody
means.
DevOps.
Yeah, I know. You love it.
Well, before, back in the day, how people were delivering was very siloed. Network teams, everybody. We were talking about it before, having big spreadsheets of releases and all this other stuff. And DevOps was a way for operational aspects of the delivery to sit close to the application, and the application team become familiar with those operational aspects and to improve the application delivery, speed and time to market, etc. And then the quality of what was being produced as well. So that's where it originated from, and there's been a lot of improvements on quality, but then obviously the industry's also evolved. So it was a methodology, obviously, but it was trying to solve a very specific problem back then, and that problem probably does still exist. I'm not saying it's gone away. There are people that do have lots of different teams that maybe are delivering in kind of slow traditional ways, and maybe are looking at just going to Agile for the first time and looking at DevOps and things like that. So obviously depends on where you are as a business, but there are also a bunch of other companies that have kind of moved to cloud, and there's things like cloud native and microservice architectures and all these other things. And the agile ways of working have already given people quite a quicker way of tracking velocity. Story pointing, especially using Scrum, etc. So there are delivery methodologies that are around DevOps too, that don't measure quality, right? So that's just about speed. But the definition of done, you could argue, could measure those things.
Exactly.
Right? So you could shift that stuff to a different place, set some requirements on what the definition of done means, define the software delivery lifecycle and around all of your delivery, and kind of encompass it as one. I don't think it was supposed to be a permanent role. It was supposed to be a cultural change in some ways, I think.
Are you saying you don't like the DevOps engineering role that has now existed?
I don't think it really means anything, really. I think it's a category of somebody's CV, but the CVs will look different. So a DevOps engineer for X and a DevOps engineer for Y, what goes in them most of the time is not the methodologies, and not so much necessarily the responsibilities towards the business outcome, but is now more about the technologies you understand.
Totally.
So, in that sense, I don't really agree with it necessarily, but I think you've just kind of got used to it. So it kind of means what it means. So you just reinterpret the meaning, which is what I've done, which is like, it's somebody helping with application delivery that's kind of like got some skills.
So let's say you've got the chance to like coin a new term, right? You can create a brand new term for this for this person that is delivering on this business outcome for this organization. What would you call it?
Well, I guess it depends. There
Manual
are probably
automator?
no, because there
No?
are
Okay,
probably
cool.
terms already
Yeah.
that exist that do get used, but just less mainstream. Like a cloud engineer would make sense,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
Because you're engineering for the cloud. That's your job. You might encompass understanding DevOps, right, as part of that, but it doesn't mean that they are a DevOps, if that makes sense.
Yep.
You might ask questions in the interview process whether they understand it. SRE, again, another role, very specific, very much not DevOps. Again,
What is that? SRE?
Site reliability engineering. Basically, always being responsible for the scale and reliability of a service, and being quite embedded sometimes in specific services and improving those services in terms of reliability and scale, right?
Yeah.
And if you're a large product business and you're seeing that as a challenge, and you feel that it does require a certain expertise who does understand reliability really well and can think like that and puts the solutions in place to measure things well, then that makes perfect sense. So automation engineers, sometimes there's those.
But I mean,
so there's lots of different terms that you could choose from that isn't necessarily DevOps engineer either.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, automation engineer, I've seen that term kind of banded around a lot, and it probably, it's so similar, right? Because you are automating all the things, but it could be anything from infrastructure to tests to applications to like automating your coffee in the morning. Like it could absolutely mean absolutely anything.
Like
so,
Wallace and Gromit in your life.
That's how I get changed in the morning. I just
pajamas
automated
come off,
automated jeans and t-shirt. I wear the same thing every day. So so you've got DevOps, which is maybe like a cloud engineer, SRE, automation person. There's a couple of other things that you touched on there, which was cloud native. So what does cloud native mean to you?
What does it mean to me?
What does it mean to you?
Well,
and then,
let me tell you what it means to me. All right, this is what cloud native means to me. So everyone, listen clearly.
Listen up.
Listen up. Listen clearly. It's a way of offsetting complexity outside of your application to simplify it, to reduce, I guess, improve on the efficiency of that. So it's giving the flexibility, portability, I guess, scalability, reliability of services, and to capitalize on those things that are cloud, as in things that become native to the cloud. You can use all of those to your advantage. If you do, that means you've shrunk how much your application has to worry about, right? Or other ancillary things to the application that might have needed to be there.
Or your business, right?
Or your business overall, So like a database, a message queue, all those things. You don't have to bundle that up as your app. You don't have to necessarily run those services. There are cloud services there for you to consume. And they can be highly scalable and reliable services that then improves your service, because obviously you're consuming something that's reliable, etc. So there's good knock-on effects and principles around that. And kind of microservice in design, usually not necessarily so, but most of the time you'd kind of simulate those things.
I guess architecture is a big part of being sort of cloud native. And there are more sort of common patterns of, say, architecture nowadays. You used to go from sort of client server models to now you've got, the kind of microservice architecture, function as a service, serverless, all of that stuff. Like what do you think is right for a business, that the types of business that we talk about? So the medium, mid-sized enterprises or enterprises delivering software. Is there any one right answer? Is it custom to what they're building?
Well, I mean, there's different schools of thought, I suppose, here. So there's a lot of services in the cloud already that you could choose from, which will yield a lot of advantages. Serverless being one of them. Not everything needs constant runtime. Not everything's processing everything 100% of the time. There are probably advantages to event-based architectures, right? Do this thing when this event comes in. Now, some of those things, and this is where it gets a bit complicated, are very bespoke to one cloud. Some things in the industry are more agnostic to other clouds. But then also some of those things that are agnostic are also very complicated. So there's a bit of a Kubernetes being one of them, let's be honest, is a big, vast ecosystem, however, yields lots of advantages, but also inherently quite complicated, and isn't that simple. It might be simple for some people, but it wouldn't be simple for somebody that's new to it, right? Who's got to learn all these new concepts, but at the same time, there's lots of products there that simplify it too. So you don't have to necessarily know the ins and outs of all of it. And then I guess that gives you multi-cloud stuff. But if you depends on your definition of multi-cloud. If I want to port things around easily, but I'm kind of very customized into one, that's harder. At the same time, the frameworks like SAM for serverless, maybe they're a bit more agnostic. Maybe it doesn't take as much to port things over. So I think from my experience, and this is going down a rabbit hole when it depends, what you need to keep your eye on is infrastructure and networks, because usually the things that become difficult to maintain or port or move between clouds are those things. It's very rare the app. The app is a library that's consuming some service like S3 bucket, RDS, whatever. It doesn't care necessarily too much, right? I'm in a container, great. I mean, I don't care. Well, what's scheduling me? Who cares, right? Kubernetes is a manifest, could be that, could be something else. But changing the library is quite quick for the team, because usually that team's iterating on bugs anyway and doing stuff. So they can easily move to a new library and test. The things that are usually complicated aren't those things. It's usually how the cloud has been constructed underneath the team, how it's operating beneath the team that's delivering, that then just can't be moved very easily. And we're like, we can't really move this to another cloud vendor. It's going to be like 8 months, and we've got to like repeat all this other stuff, and then it will need security stuff, and then we need to get it pen tested, and then like there's all these things. You just think, well, wow, that's not very cloud native.
Exactly. It's almost the cost of the cost of the business is almost higher in terms, like the cost of the development team, tiny, because they only care about the unit test, integration test of their service, and maybe wrapping a library or whatever that is using a service. But I guess the overall cost of the business to change, it could be huge, right? To make it multi-cloud or whatever else, and
which kind of defeats the purpose of the cloud. And cloud native, right? For me, cloud native is supposed to be like the flexibility and the portability. But if your downstream infrastructure implementation detail is preventing that portability, flexibility, then something's gone wrong with your cloud native implementation. Like you're not particularly cloud native. You might be from an application perspective, but not from an enablement perspective.
You're in cloud.
You're in cloud.
You're not cloud native.
Cloud native. If it's that hard for things, and so I guess to answer your question on like what do you do in the services and what does it all mean, and the answer, I think you've just got to keep your eye on how you're going about it more than anything else, because that's the thing that dictates the total cost in the end, or the lack of flexibility, I'd say.
And it's a bit of a, I guess it's a, you have to weigh it up, because you can be totally cloud native and rely on all of the sort of cloud SaaS solutions, but then you might be locked into that cloud vendor, right?
Which might be fine too.
Which might be fine, exactly.
It's not. That's what I'm saying. It just depends
on the organization.
On the organization, exactly. And there are a lot of like, stitching bits and bobs together. Even in the cloud, you kind of got to stitch things, right? Nothing just works out the box and gives you absolutely everything you need straight away, right? So, you've got to turn things on. You've got to enable the APIs, right, that to use. It's like you've got to configure them to enable them properly. It's like, so where a CloudWatch, do I have logs? Well, if you want, you can get them, but do you want them? And what do you know what I mean?
How much is it going to cost you?
Exactly.
How do you want them? Where do you want them?
Exactly. So just one thing requires like questions and thought, and then you're like, well, do I want all that tied to a cloud vendor necessarily? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's fine. You can use it. Maybe it isn't fine. Maybe you're best off going to Elk or something, buying their SaaS, right? But then it's holistic across all the clouds.
Exactly.
So there might be better alternatives that aren't the cloud vendor specifically, that give you a bit more agnosticity and portability for certain services. Again, though, you don't need to be an Elk team, right? Pretending to be a SaaS business inside of another business, providing a service back to all the teams, like you are a internal SaaS company, because we've been down that path by accident.
Totally, yeah.
You know, you go down that path and then it's impossible, because it's like you're trying to scale it, and you're now acting like a SaaS business trying to run scale on a service that isn't even what you created. You're just running it.
And your consumers, I guess, the application developers that are just trying to iterate on their services are like, I don't, just give me some bloody logs.
Exactly.
I don't. It's so expensive to get them. This cost that you're presenting to me because you've decided that you want to run your own elk stack or something locally. Locally to the business is expensive and just
really
nuts.
Expensive,
and I guess people fall into that same pattern, or they have fallen into the same pattern, even with Kubernetes, right? So back before the cloud vendors had their own managed Kubernetes services, you spend so much time managing, upgrading, patching all of these services that you can now kind of just get commodity off the shelf, where it's even taking care of the master plane. You don't see those, and actually the newer services where you've got things like Fargate, and where you don't even see the worker nodes. So I guess when we're bringing it back to sort of cloud native, is it a gradient? What is some things, is it cloud native and it is or it isn't, or is there a bit of a kind of sliding scale of something being more cloud native than less?
I mean, I hope you're not suggesting that someone goes off to create an equivalent to Dorometrics for cloud native and that someone's going to come up with a bunch of specific things to measure how cloud native you are. I mean, probably is a sliding scale.
It must be, but
I don't think that matters necessarily. It's tricky though to know. I think what you have to bear in mind is how much it's helped the business, and you need some contextual stuff there to kind of ground it in. It's like, if you've managed to write an app quickly and consume a lot of the services that the cloud vendor gave you, and it functioned really well, and there's really good SLAs for those things, right? And now you've got good agreements in place and good support agreements, and running that stuff, the alternative would have been, well, I would like to run all that stuff, and it would have cost me all this money. Then obviously doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
And so I think if the application's designed in a way that's taken advantage of everything that's there, that's all it is. It's like capitalizing on value at an application level, and
at a team level, and an organization level.
Yeah, but I think it is more on the infrastructure side, still tends to lend itself to the burden. But you're right, things are improving there. But it's a funny paradigm, because we're talking about like teams and central teams, but there's a juxtaposition between those things, which is the central team isn't the business unit. And the business unit owns the users a lot of the time on either end, and potentially the data, depends how you've organized yourself. But if there was an outage planned, or if there was a service maintenance window or something, they would have to comms to their users to let them know. Right. Because
maybe they don't have to let them know, but potentially.
But those users have an expectation on their service.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so the minute those users have an expectation on their service, and we're in a very consumer driven world, right? People get very frustrated. There's probably someone else I can go, right? So it's like, oh, well, they had an outage. They didn't even let me know. I'm going to use, whoever else, right? Because it's a competitive industry. So that expectation has to be met. And another team, I mean, this is why I think auto upgrades should be a thing. We should be shifting left to the business units. I don't think this kind of dev shifting left. I think there's elements of shifting left, but there's also shifting left operationally to the business unit for cloud, because they own the risk operationally in the end. So how can they be in control for themselves on managing the operational risk to the point of not needing to be an expert? That's the kind of dichotomy. But at the same time, I don't have a regional person knocking door to door who upgrades my Mac for me, right? There's a button that comes up and it's like, do you want to upgrade now, or do you want to do it later? I mean, that was a solved problem. It's not like, someone bangs on my door.
That person that came to my house and asked to upgrade
That was me.
my God. Was that a scam?
You were drunk.
Did
well. You were very drunk and didn't
just handed my phone over.
Exactly.
Take
all
it,
your data,
upgrade me.
all your data from doing that upgrade.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I think, the funny thing with our space, and we talk about DevOps and things, is other industries do a really good job on user experience, right? They've thought that through. Yes, technology is everywhere. That doesn't mean experience has to be really highly complicated. So you can simplify things. You can make it easier. So you can shift these things left to business units. That's definitely possible.
Yeah.
You can make cloud native easier and simpler, and also portable, and also flexible, and also multi-cloud. That is also possible.
And you can actually make it easier for the teams to not even be affected by so you can shift it left, and you can make it so simple that they're not even affected by infrastructure behind the scenes being upgraded or whatever else, right? Like all of those things. Again, we were talking about making like the right thing the easiest thing to do, and or the only thing that you're able to do. And if you've made those choices and made that available to the users of your service or whatever that you're providing to the application developers, then you're going to be in a better position. Their users are going to be in a better position.
Yeah. Because your users are theirs. Your users are them,
and they have users,
and then they have users downstream.
Exactly.
And so your internal customer, in this case, is the downstream development teams. If you are operating that kind of central capacity, I guess.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the team could hire you, and you're then responsible for the team. But even then, you've been hired to enable that team either way. Like, you have your own users. How you're serving those users, does need thought. Right, you can't just come armed with a bag of your tools and, just land in and be like, well, this is just what we're going to use because this is what I've always used.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, I don't know, like, isn't there better ways? It's 2022. Surely
I feel like it always goes one way. It's this is what we're going to use because this is the only way that I know how to do it. / this is what I've always used, or this is what we're going to use because someone told me it's the next best thing. And, I've got no experience of it. I've got no experience of this business and the requirements that I'm trying to meet, but it's the next best thing. Low code, let's do it.
Yeah. Just technology is the right one.
Yeah,
this is what
exactly.
We should be using.
Some technology.
Yeah. I saw it.
Let's just do
on
it.
Twitter.
Yeah. I need it.
Just
I need it on my CV. I need it on my CV.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be CV led.
100%.
Stuff. I'd like to think though people weren't motivated like that. I don't know. I mean, maybe I have a bit of a glass half full type mentality, but I just think the industry, if you're into technology, then you're obviously going to find it stimulating, and you're obviously going to enjoy the fact that new things are coming out, and you really enjoy it, and you love the research and love trying things and tinkering. Nothing wrong with that. It's good. It means you're exploring.
Totally.
But you need to also apply it to the business in the right way, and so it can't just be that. I think that's the disconnect. I don't think it's that people just want it on their CV. I mean, maybe there are people out there that do want it on their CV. I don't know. But I think maybe they do think it's maybe right, but they don't know if it is or it isn't because they've never used it themselves.
It's just measurement, right? It always leads back, for me, it always leads back to measuring whether or not, because if you think about it, engineering, it's quite scientific. You do something, and it can be quite scientific in that you have a hypothesis that this change that you're going to make has an impact, but people don't necessarily think of it in that way, and they're not measuring it before and after to figure out whether or not their hypothesis and their how they've experimented and implemented their thing has actually worked. Yeah. Like how do you know? And when it's user facing, to a business user, application developers are much better at kind of doing this because they might have a bit more of a connection to, say, the revenue that their website is driving, or the click-through rate of hotels being booked or something like that. Whereas the kind of that central platform team.
Cool. Sorry about that, everybody who had a ran out of battery on the thing. Kind of classic. Jay was the DevOps engineer on this
guy. Always
it says that some of the user requirements weren't gathered properly on some of this stuff. Yeah, sorry about that. We just had a bit of a battery outage on something. Had to basically swap batteries.
Cool story, John. Thanks.
So where were we? We were talking about the teams having end users of their own and meeting those requirements, and then building in line with that and making them as efficient as possible. And then you were talking about measurements, basically, obviously tracking, did that actually bring the value
exactly that
before and after.
I made a change.
The hypothesis you were talking about, yeah.
I made a change. That change cost me some time, and it cost the business some amount of money. Is that change been beneficial or not? Has it meant that people on my platform or whatever can now iterate more quickly? Does it mean that there's less security flaws? All of that stuff. I just don't think that it gets measured in that way, really, in this environment, in this kind of world that we're in.
Yeah, because they're not business measurements.
Yeah,
anywhere,
exactly.
And I'm not sure. I've yet to have seen. They're probably downstream, like you were saying before with DevOps. It was downstream. It's did that code get deployed faster?
That's it, yeah.
Right? It's not it, but that's not specific about. It's almost a representation of the downstream customer, and so it kind of makes sense. But it could have cost loads of money to do that.
It's not all encompassing.
It's not all encompassing. Yeah. Maybe the effort involved for that result was way off.
Yeah.
Right. It could have cost you. You could do anything and be like, oh, by the way, how much did that cost you? Cost you £3 million.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you, I could have done that for £2,000.
What?
Exactly.
Oh my God.
You realise.
Jesus.
So there's no context.
Give this guy some money. £2,000.
Just £2,000.
Oh my
just £2,000.
Jeez.
£2,000 to you, Jay, right now. I can do this.
Where's my checkbook?
Yeah.
Where is my checkbook?
Exactly. Get it out. But yeah, so you're right. I don't think there is structure around teams in the right way to know what the real business outcomes are beyond just standard delivery ones.
Yeah.
And therefore there isn't a true measure of the actual value in the end to the business in the right way. And then things we were kind of ranting about before is then you've got to go and buy something because that team, oh yeah, well, we don't know about security.
Yeah, exactly.
You could go as come in to businesses and just say all the words.
Yeah.
Couldn't you? You could say look, I'm a DevOps cloud native specialist
SecOps.
who likes to do a bit of sec.
Yeah.
So we call it DevSecOps. I do take finances very seriously. So I do understand FinOps.
Right. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
So I'm here to help your business under the DevSec FinOps Cloud Native institution of Jay Keshur Services.
I mean, it's now called Cash Ops.
It's just Cash Ops. Yeah. For £2,000, you can get all of these services. But we do policy as code, and it is very GitOps and infrastructure as code centric. And we do use continuous integration, continuous delivery.
My name's not Chris. Did you think it was? Okay.
These are all the things we do. Yeah. It's a bit of a funny space. Hard to all the words.
Yeah.
All the words that make no sense in some ways in the end, but make a lot of sense individually about what they mean. But so I guess cloud native. Don't know where we obviously went off on a massive tangent about all this. I've got to go off on one.
Cloud native. There's
the value of it.
The value of it. There's principles that you might kind of adopt while doing cloud native. How much responsibility you're offloading to the cloud versus how much you're taking internally. How much you're offloading to a service that you might procure, product, etc., versus doing it internally. And then what principles you might want to push down onto the application teams delivering in a cloud native way, right? And that's one thing that we haven't touched upon yet. Obviously, in previous jobs, you've helped write sort of technical standards for teams, and some of this is duplicated in 12-factor application standards. So, do you want to talk about what that means?
About that. Yeah. What do technical standards mean?
Just like 12-factor applications. What are they? Or what principles might you have that you've set sort of as a center of excellence type approach that are good for application developers that are developing in cloud?
I mean, that's massive in some ways, but
It is.
mean, yeah, it's a big topic. But I guess, everything has to boil down to, again, an outcome you're striving for. So there are, like, you want that language. If you choose certain languages, you want the ancillary things to be as templatable as possible, right? So I guess that's the thing, like logging standards. Create a library, reuse it, have the standards baked into your languages. The aim is to just reduce as much complexity as possible in the application, and then to also offset some of those services independently. So like we talked about before, you talk about payment stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the service is, but that service in theory should be able to have its own release cycle and also scale independently. There are complexities with microservices, right? Keeping track of everything moving around you. How do you test that everything's going to work?
Version it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So backwards compatibility comes in there and setting those standards that, I think Google's one is, if somebody's consuming this API, at that point, I've got a contract to support that user, right? They're now using it. There's an expectation on it. So long as you kind of have those principles laid out for yourselves, then, you can just work out good ways of engineering at the application level to always be backwards compatible, version your APIs properly as you're moving. Maybe you can then get the data to say, well, no one's using the old API anymore. Now we can decommission that logic outside. We don't have to have that version. So there's many best practices. But if you're doing microservices, you need those rules, I think, in place. It's just to make it easier for yourselves and to have different teams.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're kind of like a monolithic team under the guise of a microservice, just because it's easier.
I guess there's also like organizational ways of achieving something like that, right? Like you could go off and like have an API gateway and start just pushing, keep your old version there and just start building out your new one iteratively.
Yeah, totally.
And, so like the onus on the application development team changes depending on how you've enabled them in the right ways.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that just because of hot fixes and things like that. You've still, if there's something wrong with that version, you've still got to go and fix it.
Multiple places.
Exactly. So I think you're best off managing it in code personally, where you have different version endpoints inside your code, and that's very easily tangible and you can see it, right? And you've organized your code in a really good way and effective way. But obviously there's many ways to skin a cat. You don't have to do it that way, but and then just basically, obviously, lots of tests, failing fast, those principles, mocking things, stubbing things. There's even cloud services, there's local stack, there's stuff like that you can use, right? That you can even have it local on your machine. You can test that these things work. Even when you're using mocked cloud services. So there are many ways to do that. And the testing pyramid triangle thing, obviously, lots of unit tests and very small amounts of end-to-end at the top. That's what you're aiming for. So they're all the kind of like standards. Obviously, there's bazillions of them, way more than the ones I've listed, but they're like the main things on quality benchmarks.
Nice.
What would you have said? Have I missed something obvious?
No, I think that's pretty much it. There's obviously the ways to kind of get your application running. So splitting out kind of environment config in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, using environment variables.
Yeah, exactly.
In
so
your application. Yeah,
exactly. So just things that mean that you can scale, like build your application once and run it in the most efficient way by letting it sort of read config from something that's easily sort of insertable as possible, and then managing the release cycles of everything while increasing the automation around your products, the quality of your products independently, and having a what's it called? an architecture that is decoupled. Essentially, that's all it boils down to.
Yeah, because some of them, even with the decoupled architectures, some things are people things. Some people can be technology things. And I remember people talking about, I need to release this all my dependencies to test everything works. And I was like, well, you kind of don't, right? You could just say, actually, you as a team responsible for this microservice is responsible for managing and supporting it for all environments.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, there's an expectation on another team that there'll be a dev version of this on the latest version of the thing, which I also can check the version of. And then I can test when I'm released to dev that everything works according to that version thing. And you've got your life cycle. It's like, it doesn't have to be that I'm now responsible for releasing your dev thing to see if it works. Because like, I don't even know it works necessarily, right? I don't know how to, so it seems a bit odd when people move it. It's like, operate it as if you were like the team's map the services, because someone's got to support that service eventually. So
you've got a contract. You've got both a software contract and a contract to the rest of your business.
And to the team responsible.
On everything that you do.
There are many different ways to think about the problem, but the instinctive way is they'll want to solve it all by releasing everything as once in their own environments and then testing everything works. And well, that's possible, but you could be spending ages trying to get someone else's thing to actually work, which isn't a great use of your time to find out that actually it worked once you've got it hosted. You're like, so I just sunk loads of unnecessary time.
Exactly.
That were not business value, but cool. Well, we had a little bit of a hiccup in this episode. Probably might do some sneaky edits.
Exactly.
To see what we can do.
Editing skills to the max.
Obviously, as always, want to hear from you. Any topics of interest, please reach out. If you don't agree with us, please reach out. And or if you do agree with us, reach out and have a conversation about it. But yes, we shall speak to you all next time. Again, we'll just pick a random topic. Who knows what we're going to be speaking about?
I don't. You do you?
I don't have a clue anymore. So yeah, and stay tuned next week when we'll release another episode.
Great. Thanks, mate.
Bye.